Hey, moms and dads, it's Dr. Scott Haggerty back here with Lee Family Chiropractic. And I want to share something with you, which I think is going to be pretty cool for those of you who have kids, where if there's any issues with balance, coordination, wanting to know what you can do to improve those things if your child has some sensory issues. Because when we talk about all of those things, whether it's they're, a little clumsy, we know that they have maybe some difficulty with like fine motor and gross motor skills, or they just seem discoordinated, or they're not super flowy when they're out there playing sports. We know that there's a number of different things that contribute to that. One of the big things that goes into this is an inability of the information from the sensory system to reach the brain and then be coordinated properly inside of the proper parts of the brain so that we can plan our motor movements, we can coordinate sensory input, we know where we are in space like we're supposed to. And so what I want to do is I want to share with you a video that will help you to understand, number one, how the brain actually plans to move and how it coordinates the movements. But also, if you have a child that's struggling with things like sensory issues, poor posture, poor motor planning, whether it's fine or gross motor, or they just seem like they're clumsier than what they should be, then oftentimes we can go through the process of understanding that more than likely there are some communication issues between their brain and their body. And so I'm going to show you a video that goes through some research that talks about, number one, what this thing that's called the cerebellum is, but also how this cerebellum works and how the spine influences this. Because, I get questions from moms and dads on our videos, on our Facebook page, on our YouTube channel, our patients here in the office wondering, so when we do adjustments, how does this change the way that my child is able to, develop better fine motor skills or change their sports performance? Because we see all of this stuff. But until you actually understand what happens at the level of the brain and how they've been able to see it in research, and then how we know what's happening and how that translates, oftentimes it can seem kind of foreign. So I'm going to screen share with you so that you can see what I have here in terms of a video that I reference a lot. The research video was created by a research group out of New Zealand, a neuroscientist by the name of Dr. Heidi Horvick. But it's a great video because what it does is it helps us to get a context for how this whole process works, and how when we see kids have these amazing changes in balance, coordination, sensory input, the way that they are able to regulate their body in space, the way that they become less clumsy. This helps you to get a better context as to why these things change and why they change so powerfully. So I'm going to pull this video up here for you. So let me go ahead and we're going to go to this really cool video. I'm going to go ahead and play this for you. So go ahead and watch.
Did you know that spinal adjustments can change the way your cerebellum functions? The cerebellum is known as the little brain within your brain. This little structure at the back of your brain is incredibly important. For example, the cerebellum is extremely important for us to be able to perform everyday movements and tasks, such as walking and reading and writing. It is also essential to be able to stay balanced and upright. The cerebellum does not initiate movement, but it contributes to the coordination, the precision, and the accurate timing of your movements. It does this by comparing all the inputs it receives from the sensory systems of the brain and body, and integrates and processes these inputs, and then fine-tunes your movements so they are perfectly coordinated and timed. So you are not clumsy. The cerebellum is not just important for balance and accurate coordinated movements, but it's also important for other cognitive tasks, such as being able to pay attention to a task, or for language, as well as the way we relate to fear and pleasure responses. And we know that the cerebellum is very important for learning new movements and skills. Brain scientists have done several research studies exploring how chiropractic care impacts the function of the brain, and have even looked at specifically cerebellum function. It turns out that proper movement of the spine is in fact very important for the brain, in particular for how it knows where all your body parts are in space. And since the cerebellum is known to influence this in a brain map of the body as well, these brain scientists have specifically tested whether adjusting the spine could impact the way the cerebellum processes information, as well as the way it talks to both the perception and movement centers in the brain. These brain scientists use sophisticated machines to measure brain waves, or electroencephalography, and showed that spinal adjustments do appear to change the way the cerebellum processes sensory information. They have also used machines called transcranial magnetic stimulation to measure how the cerebellum talks to the movement centers in the brain, and showed that spinal adjustments changes this as well. They did not stop here and also measured the way the brain controls overarm throwing movements, because it's well known that the cerebellum is very important for controlling such movements. Throwing is a skill which is highly dependent on intact cerebellar function. People with damaged cerebellums fail to release the ball when they are throwing at an optimal time in overarm throwing, leading to slower ball speeds and resulting in slower elbow extension velocities and accelerations. There is also an absence of elbow extension deacceleration at the end of the throw and slower wrist flexion velocities. What these researchers found was that spinal function also influenced the way people perform arm throwing movements. This series of research studies, along with lots of other studies, show us that even if you are not in pain, if your spine is not working well, this can impact the way your brain, including your cerebellum, perceives how you are sitting or standing and where your arms and legs are and how they move. Your spinal function can impact how coordinated you are and how well and how accurately you move your body. This can impact you all day, every day. Even taking a simple step involves your brain and cerebellum perceiving the terrain, planning the movements needed, to sense how you move, and to sense where you want to put your foot down, and to coordinate this entire process with pinpoint perfection. Another cool study conducted in Auckland, New Zealand, has shown that a period of chiropractic care, even in older adults, was able to improve these people's brain's ability to sense where their foot was and to help them process visual and sound information at the same time, faster and more accurately, and to be able to take a faster step if they wanted to. All this research shows us that your spinal function is very important for your ability to learn new movements, and that chiropractic adjustments can help improve learning new movements. So are you trying to learn a new musical instrument or a sport? Are you struggling with reading and writing? Do you find that you're clumsy? Do you trip over your own feet or knock your elbows on door frames? Or do you stub your toe often? Maybe you need to go and see your family.
All right, so let's go ahead and stop that. So as we step back here into the conversation, moms and dads, I hope this makes sense. Because whether it is a child that has difficulty with comprehension, whether it's a child who has difficulty with reading and writing, if it's a child who has difficulty with clumsiness, if it's a child who has difficulty with sensory processing, hopefully this gives you an understanding that they're all tied into one another. And when we get the questions of how does what we do, how do these adjustments change brain function, hopefully that gives you an understanding as to why. Because one of the big things you have to keep in mind is that part of the brain, the cerebellum, because it's so intimately involved in feeding information to the brain, if the information is not making it there correctly, then the brain's an ability then to have proper output, right? Coordination of movements, the way that we perceive literally all manner of sensory input, but also stress responses and things like that are going to be dramatically altered if the spine is not able to convey the information accurately to the brain, because the cerebellum also controls if we have stress responses or rest and digest responses, called autonomic regulation. And it's really critical for this. So if you have a child that's struggling with any of these types of issues, keep in mind that there is likely underlying input problems that are affecting the way the brain works. I did a video not that long ago where it was called the 5 Ds of ADHD. And what it does, it talks about this algorithm that the brain goes through from the time that there are disruptions in information coming into the brain. We call disafferentation. When the part of the spine stops moving, they call it a dyskinesia. Kinetics is the study of motion. When the spine moves, we have normal kinetics. When a part of the spine stops moving, it's called a dyskinesia. The dyskinesia triggers the sequence of events that starts this thing called a disafferentation. Disafferentation literally means abnormal input. And so when the brain's not getting normal input, especially into the cerebellum can't get the full picture of how it should coordinate movements or sensory input. And it leads to all different types of things. And the longer that they go on, the more disrupted the input is, the more the brain has to try and figure it out. But what it does is it also simultaneously triggers stress responses in the brain. And so it starts leading into these imbalances in the way the brain controls the balance between stress response and growth and development responses. And it just wires down until we get to a point where we start seeing the expression of then cognitive symptoms, behavioral, focus, attention, because the cerebellum can't get the information up to the higher parts of the brain, the cortex, to then have normal function for attention and focus and all of the things that are necessary to perform in school, but also for motor planning. Because if that information is not coming in like it should, then all of the decisions the brain makes come with inaccurate information. And in turn, the output behaviors, planning, whether it's motor or cognitive, are all going to be disrupted. So I hope this addresses a lot of the questions that many of you have, because I know this is something I hear quite a bit. So when I do videos like this, the whole point is to give you a greater understanding of why these things happen, and then how, when we go through the process of caring for the kids and the adults that we do here, why they see such pronounced changes, especially if you've hit roadblocks in other places, whether it's OT or PT. Because, no disrespect, I think they're fantastic, but there's just a roadblock that they can't bypass because they can't do this. And so when we jump into the process and we can change the input to the brain in such a pronounced way, then what we do is we open up the pathway for the brain to be able to go and change in a brand new way, and we can accelerate the pace if the child's already in PT or OT, or speech, because we get kids with speech delays that come in and they start getting adjusted and they just explode with speech. So when you look at this from the perspective more globally, right? Sometimes when it's just clumsiness and motor planning and just some basic issues where you're concerned and they seem a little clumsy, well, then this is why it would help. But if they have bigger delays where there's really significant problems with motor coordination, then when you look at how the brain changes and how it rewires when you open up the pathways, that also explains why so many of these kids that we care for have these massive, massive changes in the ability to self-regulate, motor plan, cognitive changes, all these things. So if this was helpful, do me a favor, give me a thumbs up on Facebook or YouTube, wherever you're watching this. Also, if this is something that would be valuable for a loved one, pass this video on so that they can hear this information as well, to go and give them some different understandings and hopefully some solutions. If you're in the Cleveland area and you have questions, you can reach out to us directly. You can go through our Facebook page and send us a message. We'll get right back to you. Or you can go to elitefamilychiros.com and also send us messages directly through the website. We're more than happy to get back in touch with you. If you are not in our area and you would like to speak to somebody who does what we do, you can go to www.thenfwa.org. That is a nationwide provider directory of doctors who have the same training that I do, and they would be able to answer questions for you and help you to get the information necessary, so that if you're looking for resources for your child, you can talk to them and get some more direct access and get your questions answered that way as well. So hope this is helpful. And again, guys, this is Dr. Scott Haggerty with Elite Family Chiropractic. Look forward to seeing you in the next video. God bless you all, and be elite.